Hello, everyone. My name is Joshua Stone. I'm at the University of South Carolina, and today I'm going to be telling you a little bit about some of the temporal and spatial variability of a jellyfish near and dear to my heart, the Stomolophus meleagris in the South Atlantic Bight. So for those of you not familiar with the region, the South Atlantic Bight is this area of the southeastern United States. It's characterized by a very wide continental shelf, so it's quite shallow, not a lot of reef, very kind of sandy, muddy bottom in that area, but is highly productive with lots of estuaries in the region. And so in that area, the cannonball jellyfish is the most abundant scyphozoan in the region by far. There are some other species there, but the cannonballs are by far the most abundant there. But despite their abundance, we know very little about their life history, about their ecology, what effects they're having on the food web or the rest of the ecosystem as a whole. And so a lot of my research is then looking into how does this very abundant species fit into the food web and affect them. And so to start with that, we wanted to ask questions about just very basic descriptive work about where they are, how many there are, and whether their populations have been changing in the long term. And so we've heard a lot over the last couple days about how jellyfish might be increasing worldwide, or lots of hypotheses about that. And so this is a main question that I'm asking, and I can jump to the conclusion that no, they are not increasing in this system. And I'll tell you why in a moment. But I think this more important question is not, are they increasing, but are they ecologically important in the region? And so to that, we do have the answer of yes. And so now that I've shown you the end results, I can talk you through how I got to those points. So the work that we did was using a long-term time series data set from the Fisheries Survey. This is the Southeast Area Monitoring and Assessment Program, or the CMAP survey. And so this government's Fisheries Survey goes out and they do seasonal bottom trawls in the spring, summer, and fall in this coastal zone of the South Atlantic Bight. Many different strata, approximately 300 or so trawls are done in each season. And we have data on cannonball jellyfish for the years 2001 through 2019. It is still ongoing, but I'm just going to present data up through 2019. And so they record cannonball jellyfish abundance and biomass as part of this survey, which is quite nice of them to do. So when we look at the overall abundance for the entire region of cannonballs, we can get an index of abundance and how it varies from year to year. So on this plot, we have on the y-axis, it's the median biomass anomaly. So if you have a value higher than 0, more jellyfish than the median, less than 0, fewer, and this is a log scale. So you can see a lot of interannual variability, right? The total biomass in the region can vary 2 orders of magnitude from year to year, but no overall long-term trend. And then also within each season, no long-term trend either. But there is this high interannual variability gives us hints about how they could have major variable impacts on the ecosystem. So I wanted to know where they were, right? You ask someone in the region where the jellyfish at, they'll point out to the ocean and look at you like you're stupid, right? They're out in the ocean. So I wanted to know kind of north to south where they're distributed. And so if we look at the long-term averages on this plot on the right, we have kind of the far south of the different sampling strata on the left, and then going up to the north on the right of this plot. And so you can see that kind of south region is where we have the most abundant jellyfish, and they are most common there. So we now know where they are, kind of in this coast of Georgia and South Carolina, and they are less abundant to the north and the south. The same species is found in the Gulf of Mexico and can be quite abundant there as well, but there's this gap in high abundance along the coasts of Florida. All right, so that's where they are, but how many are there? So if we do some kind of general back of the envelope calculations, we can say that within our survey area, which is kind of limited but within the survey area, there's about 11 million kilograms in any given year of cannonball jellyfish. This is, definitely an underestimate since I can't extrapolate outside of where we're surveying, but they can be quite abundant. And just to put that into context, if we compare the overall cannonball jellyfish numbers with the other species that are caught in these trawls, right? These are fisheries trawls, so they're mostly targeting finfish as well as commercially harvested invertebrates like shrimp and crabs, things like that. If we compare cannonball jellyfish to everything else, on average, they make up 20% of the total catch as far as wet weight is for spring and fall. So quite abundant and one of the most abundant species in the region. And so this brings me to my main question then is what kind of effects do these very abundant species have on the rest of the food web? And if we take kind of our average abundances that we saw and do some calculations based on this nice Larson paper of feeding rates, digestion rates, and things like that, we can say, okay, on average, these cannonball jellyfish are feeding on a little over 1,000 mesozooplankton per cubic meter per day. These cannonball jellyfish mostly are thought to feed on mesozooplankton and maybe some microzooplankton as well, but it's not well characterized in the region. So this is these are just some preliminary kind of guesses or calculations. And then at their highest abundance, they can be over 6,000 or consume over 6,000 mesozooplankton individuals per cubic meter per day. And to put that in context, kind of the typical standing stock of mesozooplankton. So if I went out and took a net tow on any given day, it'd be around 10,000 mesozooplankton per cubic meter. So on an average day, these cannonball jellyfish could potentially be feeding on 10% of the standing stock of the mesozooplankton. And then, when they're in years with more abundance, it can be even higher. So I think we'll definitely need to do some follow-up work on this, but the potential is there for them to be major players in structuring the pelagic food web in the region. All right, so one of the other things we wanted to look at was, okay, we have all this interannual variability. What's driving that? Is it temperature? How's climate change affecting them? Wanted to kind of tie this back to environmental variability. And what we found is that we really have no idea what kind of environmental drivers are causing these changes in jellyfish abundances. So we looked at mostly shifts in temperature and salinity and chlorophyll concentrations. Part of the problem is we don't really have their full life history figured out yet. We don't know where the polyps are. We don't really know what we don't really know where to look, right, of what environmental factors might be impacting the polyp and the polyp reproduction, because we don't know where the polyps are or what conditions they really prefer. And so I think first we're going to need to develop a better understanding of their full life history, the environmental preferences of the polyps before we can start trying to tie that to interannual and long-term variability. That being said, we did see a little bit of influence of temperature on the size or the average size of the cannonball jellyfish. So if we're just looking in the spring is when these jellyfish are most abundant and also at their largest as far as the seasonal cycle. And we did find a negative correlation between spring bottom temperature and size of these animals. So if we had a warmer spring, they tended to be smaller on average. And so what I think we're seeing here is mostly a shift probably in phenology. So when it's warmer, they might be starting to strobilate earlier. And so we're getting some of those smaller medusae into our averages. Our data set, we weren't measuring individual. We're kind of measuring the bulk number and biovolume of the full jellyfish catch. So we don't have individual size data, unfortunately, for this. But we can see that kind of lower average size as we have warmer temperatures. So I think there is hints here that environment does play a role in their populations and something to investigate further with some more specific and finer detailed sampling. All right, so just to conclude on these main points, Stomolophus meleagris is the most abundant jellyfish species and one of the most abundant pelagic species in the South Atlantic Bight. And they make up 20% on average of the total wet weight of pelagic species. And if you convert that to carbon, it's still a fair amount, about 5% of the carbon. They're most abundant in the spring in the kind of that south region for the survey. And they do potentially exert top-down control on the mesozooplankton communities. They can be very, very abundant. There's high interannual variability, but the mechanism behind that is not yet well understood. And so I have a lot of future work that I'd like to do. And so a lot of this is going to be starting up this winter and next spring, and then going to be a major part of my lab's work going forward. And so we want to start answering these questions like, where do cannonballs fit in the food web? So what do they eat? Characterize their gut contents. So we had that great talk by Veronica earlier. So definitely like to start looking and answering these questions using different methodologies as well to better characterize what they're eating. Also look at what eats them and see how their biomass might be moving up into the food web. I'm also very interested in this idea of these cannonballs as a floating reef and habitat for other organisms. We see lots of commensal juvenile fish, spider crabs, other crustaceans in and on these cannonball jellyfish, but it's never really been quantified or fully investigated. And I think that because they're so abundant and they're in an area with very few kind of natural benthic reefs, they could potentially provide a large habitat for some of these juvenile fish and crustaceans. And also, it's moving, and so potentially act as a major kind of vector or connection between populations along the coast and between reefs and estuaries. So going to be investigating that as well. And then I didn't really get into this during my talk, but this is a commercially harvested species. There was a commercial fishery for them in Georgia up until 2020. And then when China stopped importing them, the fishery closed down. But they're very abundant. They're very easy to catch here. There already is a large amount of boats that's mostly the shrimp vessels will then go out and collect cannonball jellyfish. So there's a lot of infrastructure already there. And I suspect that the commercial fishery for these will begin increasing and picking back up in the near future, especially with some of the potential collapse of the fishery for these in the Gulf of California. And so before that kind of ramps up, I want to do some of this work on what would be the larger effects on the full food web of an increase in commercial fishing for them. And then answering some very fishery kind of questions. You know, what's the best time of year? What's the best sizes for the fishermen to be targeting the capture of these jellyfish for? And then, you know, the biggest fisheries question of all, right? What's the maximum sustainable yield? And so have a better idea of the impacts also the bycatch and things like that would have on the rest of the food web. So with that, just wanted to acknowledge a lot of this work was done by a master's student of mine, Lauren Falk. And then this work was also recently published a few months ago in Marine Ecology Progress Series. So I encourage you to check that out or find me if you have any other questions. So thank you very much. Appreciate it.